Okay, so the idea of this second to last session is to summarize the discussion of the breakout rooms. So I think we can start with the first day. Let me see which were the selected rooms. In the alert generation part, there were the LSST input for brokers, full stream versus metadata, then how many full community brokers will be supported, and then, sorry, I missed the first. Was it, what common cross-match information should be included in the alerts? LSST input for brokers, and how many full community brokers will be supported? And I believe these were the three breakout rooms. So who can talk about the first? What common cross-match information should be included in the alerts? The idea is to have about 5 minutes per person and discussion. I believe it was Federica, but she's not there, I think.
I think she asked John to fill in, but I don't see John. Somebody that was in that session can tell us a little bit about it?
Do we have notes for that session?
Which session are we talking about?
Cross-match is...
Oh, I was there.
Okay.
So all the notes are in the live note document, page 4, if you need.
Give me a moment and I can fill in. I didn't realize Fed mentioned me.
Yeah, there are notes in the document. I will share it in the chat.
Where's the link to the document? I'll add my notes. I just sent it through Slack, but I can send it via Zoom. Here it is.
Maybe while John is filling in, we can go to the second breakout room and come back.
Okay, so second was... I lost it. The LSST input for brokers, full stream versus just metadata.
Hi, can you listen to me? Bruno.
Yes.
I was there, and if I recall, you asked me to show what we have been discussing. So I'm going to use the notes for reference, so to help my memory. But in 2 minutes, what we discussed was the difference between the full stream of alerts versus a lightweight stream. This lightweight will be only metadata. Mostly the whole session was about a Q&A session, and Eric Belm was answering questions. Also, some other folks stepped up and answered some questions for ZDF. So pretty much there was a corpus of main questions regarding what is metadata in this context, what actually this means, what will be included. Pretty much what I've understood from the session was that the full stream will contain pixels, cutouts, everything. Metadata only would be some coordinates, some other values. They will be useful for some people, for some groups that will be able to filter them out using just a positional cross-match, for instance, or even before seeing what the cutouts contain. So also there's this notion that the audience to get the full packet will be roughly 100 people, 100 services asking for the full stream. So it's not a concern. Servers would manage that. So it's not a server side of question. But still, there's a lot of investigation on this topic. Project is not completely sure what we are going to include here, and discussions are ongoing. I don't know if this is enough.
Thank you. So is there any follow-up on the discussion?
I don't know, honestly. Sorry, been busy today.
So perhaps now we can go back to the what common cross-match information you should include in the alerts.
Yes, I'm ready now. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so we discussed a bit about the types of cross-matching. In general, there's interest in cross-matching, of course, to external catalogs, and of course, user-supplied catalogs and so forth. There was some clarification of what the LSST project will be providing. The LSST itself will be only matching to known solar system objects and otherwise just their own catalogs, meaning sort of what they produce from the deep coads, for example, and so forth. And furthermore, that when served is going to consist of basically an object ID. So if you want to then go and get the additional information, colors, whatever it is, classification of the galaxy, whatever the right word is, you will have to have data rights to be able to access that. Now, presumably the brokers will be able to access that, but LSST is providing an object ID, as I understood the discussion. With on-sky distances, there'll be multiple candidate matches provided. However, exactly how the cross match is done and the algorithms are viewed as very important and were discussed a lot. I believe that the final way that is done is to be determined. An example of one that was brought up from Pan-STARRS, although obviously not this particular case in the Southern Hemisphere, is that if you have a source, you might associate it with the nearest objects to cross-match, but of course it might really be part of M31, and you want to know that, even though M31 being so huge is not going to appear as the nearest object. So there's a lot of tricky things like that. So in general, there needs to be work on the confusion limits, the quality of astrometry. Those are the things that will probably limit the cross-matching. I guess so the cross-matching in some sense is the responsibility of the broker, unless we are talking about the LSST object ID matching. I could add that there was also a discussion, which you can see in the second set of notes, that there was some discussion of clarifying exactly what forced photometry is and when it's available. The forced photometry will not be available right away. It will be available when the second alert is sent out, which is sometime later. However, as I understood it, it will be possible for the brokers for a limited number of objects to request forced photometry within 24 hours for some list of objects that are of interest. That was my understanding of the discussion. And Melissa Graham is working on a proposal to work on host galaxy size information in the cross-matching algorithm, which right now is not implemented, but might be part later on. This is related to so-called DLR, which I don't want to expand, although I think I could. All right.
Thank you. So perhaps we can move to the next, which was how many full community brokers will be supported? And I think the discussion will be short in this case. Anais?
So it was basically me and Leanne. I think Leanne can answer this better than I.
Do you want me to answer? Do you want me to? This was our discussion from yesterday. Okay, so I'll just remind everyone that the project has a requirement to support a minimum of 5 community brokers, full stream brokers, and that's our minimum. What I will say at this stage, however, is that we endeavour to do better, and we are looking at various different ways that we can maybe support more community brokers. Part of this is one of the drivers for the lightweight alerts that Eric presented at the PCW's proposal. I'll just again emphasize that this is a proposal that we're investigating. It is not part of the current strategy. So that's our minimum requirement. We will be serving at least 5, but we will be looking at ways that we can do better than that.
Any questions for Liam? So if not, we can move to the next discussion session on science collaborations. And the first was about taxonomy. And I think I was the moderator, so I
Yeah,
can.
in 5 minutes.
Sorry? Okay. So I have, I was looking at the notes that I think Julian took, and also had my own notes. So as to summarize, we discussed what taxonomy should be used for brokers in general. And we started with the famous plot by Ayer and Mo Lau B from 2007. And just to show all the diversity, the zoo of variability that there is. We noted that this taxonomy has many stellar variability classes, but it doesn't have a lot of resolution into the transient classes. And of course, the practicality of this diagram will depend on the size of the training sets. We then discussed whether taxonomy should be phenomenological or physical or ontological. So it should be based on the behavior of the objects or what we think is the nature of the objects. So, for example, Matthew mentioned that SPF has both taxonomies in parallel. It was mentioned that brokers will not be able to do all the subclasses, and I think this is expected, and probably there will be brokers downstream refining the classification. And so we were talking a little bit about this idea of doing hierarchical classification. So some people suggested having some first very broad classification and then start differentiating. But there is different timescales for this classification. So for periodic sources, you don't necessarily need a very fast classification. There was the question asked by Robert, what is the minimal taxonomy that should be supported by brokers? Perhaps we should agree on that, or perhaps not, I don't know. What is the minimum background information if these sources are known? Then Franz mentioned that perhaps we need to focus more on things that change from our expectation. So let's say changing look agents. And it was mentioned that really we should base these decisions on what the science collaborations have to say. What is the division between a broker and a scientist? Who is doing what? I think it's also kind of a continuous there. Gordon mentioned also that this diagram has helped a lot, but it has also become a little bit of a constraint. So perhaps we should think further beyond this diagram. And this is connected to, of course, plastic, the efforts of plastic, of collecting models and that will be needed for LSST. So was mentioned also perhaps the idea of doing some kind of task force to work on this taxonomy, this diagram, perhaps join efforts with the plastic. So I think the combination of synthetic and real data will be key. Matthew also mentioned that we should start working with probabilities even for labeling, so we should get used to that. We cannot have hard classifications, and updating the taxonomies will be difficult. So Anais also mentioned that taxonomies are a bit artificial, and nature is not always discrete, could be continuous. Yeah, and so there was then Matthew mentioned again this idea of hierarchical taxonomies that can improve iteratively, but Anais said that even if perhaps this is good for us, but perhaps for machine learning this is not. So perhaps one versus all classification is better in some cases. And I think that's my summary. And the next breakout room was how to create a hierarchy of brokers that listen to the LSST main brokers for specialized science cases. And I believe the moderator was Ashish. Is Ashish here?
Yeah, hi. So I'm going to summarize this. Julian took the notes for that. So we started by discussing how different brokers could lead to different taxonomies and how that could be an issue, for instance, right? And so what can happen there is that, so when we talk of hierarchical brokers, you could consider a single broker having its own sub brokers also, but then you could also consider LSST providing a stream of events and one broker doing some broad classification and other brokers simply listening to those classification. So when you are talking about brokering happening within a broker, then you could use something like Tom and Kafka to keep track of the provenance as well as versioning, etc. But when you have hierarchical brokering, that can be an issue. And that is something that people may have to take care of to make sure that when at the end of the broker, when people are receiving the streams, they know the provenance of that, how was it classified before and so on. And especially if things are going to change, especially if classifications are going to change after a few points, that can become really, really critical. And that is with respect to linking of brokers. So Fink folks mentioned, for instance, that they have been version controlling both software and data and various computing resources that need to be allocated to different streams as needed. Because again, if there are multiple sub-brokers within a broker, how the resources are allocated to these sub-brokers may be important depending on, some of the streams may be very small, some of the streams may be much larger, and you cannot have same amount of resources everywhere. And where is the question about if there are 5 brokers and all of them are classifying similar types of objects, but if you get 5 classifications, what do you do? I think ideally, the market forces will decide which broker a given user should listen to based on their science. But especially initially, it would make sense to listen to multiple of them and see how the classifications are coming out, and some kind of discussion about that will be important. So related to that was also this fact that if it turns out that one broker is doing well for a particular classification and they're using a certain algorithm, we should still not homogenize that algorithm in the sense that all brokers should not be using a single algorithm, because we want a diversity of algorithms. So we want to keep improving things as time goes on rather than freezing them at some point. So that is another point that was mentioned. And so the question of training sets and passing these training sets through the different brokers also came up. So Plastic, for instance, is developing with the test data set some sets, and it would be perhaps a good set to pass it through. But again, just like we had the discussion in the training set discussion session just before this, what will also be important is that there should be a good combination of machine learned classification, active learning, and human-based classification that goes into that. So all those factors came up. And then also comparing the broker performances in general was considered to be important, again, for market forces to understand later on that which is the broker that I should be listening to. So again, relating to diversity in that. I think those were the main points that we covered. There were some additional small things again related to this that came up.
Thank you, Shis. Any comments or questions?
This is Michael Strauss. A question. You raised 2 related but perhaps distinct points. One is whether algorithms should be frozen from over a 10-year period, and the second of the extent to which algorithms should be shared or duplicated between brokers. You certainly, I would certainly argue against keeping algorithms fixed forever. The whole point of LSSD, of Rubin Observatory, is to learn how to do these things better. But I do worry a little bit about sort of the algorithms or the different brokers looking over each other's shoulders and sort of all jumping on bandwagons. If one does it better than the others, then they'll, or at least is perceived to do so, then they'll all end up copying each other. And not sure that's a completely good thing.
That's exactly what we said, actually. Yeah, so we should not have one algorithm being used by all brokers. And so when algorithms within a broker change, versioning should keep track of that. But yes, that's essentially the consensus, that we should not have a single algorithm shared by all brokers.
I'm not sure how much of a concern that will actually be. So for Plastic, we had 1,000 entries, but 24 of them odd were super competitive. There's not much between them. that's a large number of things, and all of them used pretty different approaches. Some were using boost decision trees, some were neural networks, whatever have you. And I only expect that diversity to sort of go up over time. So I suspect that even if they wanted to, brokers wouldn't necessarily standardize on some single algorithm because there are too many choices out there. It's becoming a little cottage industry where every grad student does something like that for their thesis. So.
Just to build on that a little bit, I think broker and algorithm aren't like a one-to-one mapping here, right? And there's going to be like 10 things that are trivially easy to run that everyone's going to run. And there's going to be one thing that does MCMC period folding, and only 2 people want to run that, or something like that, right? So, and I think actually there'll be many, I imagine many brokers would present 2 things. Here is the classification based on everything we knew up to 2024, and it is fixed for 1 year. We're also using that same algorithm updated more continually, depending on what you want to do, sample reconstruction, or if you wanted to get the best of this one thing that we've only seen 2 of.
Yes, I guess Michael is raising the point of training sets. At the end, we may all use the same, I don't know, random forest with this feature extraction, but if we train with different data sets, this will be different. So I think this is also part of the richness of each of the classifiers available in the market, of course.
Yeah. There's one more question, and perhaps after that we can move to the next breakout room. Rick?
Yeah, will each algorithm have a standalone version of the code that you can download, run on simulations, make tweaks without having to, you know, download the whole broker environment or having to use the whole broker environment?
Yeah, I don't know if the entire broker environments are going to be available for downloading. Meaning, I'm sure that there'll be some parts of them that are shared, but I think that'll depend completely on the brokers.
But it's more about making sure that the algorithms themselves are coded in a way that you can just grab the algorithm and nothing else. And
I
run
think
it.
in practice, sure, there's no requirement the brokers do that. And I think the slightly more complicated thing is not just the algorithm, but how is it trained and used and configured. But I think all brokers intend for that to be replicable.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So perhaps we can move to the following, which is combining the alert strings and the periodic data releases. Who was the moderator in that session, in that broker breakout room?
I think that was me. Not that I'm confused about what I did yesterday, although maybe I am. I just didn't remember what the title of the breakout room was.
Okay, sorry, it was the real-time versus delay broker outputs.
Yeah, are those the same rooms?
I know, but perhaps you can continue. You can start, and then if someone we find the moderator of the other session, after you.
Okay, so we talked about I guess a couple different issues. For me, you know, I've always loved hearing about solar system, being reminded about how things cut so differently and how things happen so fast because asteroids and other things are small, and light teletron is not, you know, the limit as it is for many of the rest of us. And that does lead to a need for very, very fast response, but combined with often wanting to do some archival stuff that does searches in different dimensions that I easily think of as I'm a simple RA deck astronomer. And I think there's some unmet challenges there. There was discussion about cross-matching, some various ideas about that. You know, Melissa and I talked a little bit about our idea of when doing the effective radii from a galaxy, what do you do about the Messier galaxies or whatever? I mean, there's a northern bias in them, but anyway, you know, that idea, very nearby galaxies. And we have some clever thoughts about how to technically do that. But the basic idea is cross-matching at 10 arcsecond radii is fine and easy. Cross-matching things that are a degree on the sky becomes expensive. I think one theme was there wasn't a clear, people cared about the difference between historical data and data fixed to a given data release. Now, maybe that was just because the technical implementation of provenance was just sort of some technical detail, or maybe it's sort of there. But I think lots of people were thinking, just give me all the data that are available at some point, not necessarily only give me the data the next data release. But I think, and this is just my opinion, I think in year 5, that's a useful distinction. In year 1 and even year 2, there's not really a previous data release. So we're not even going to be spending the first few years in a mode, I think, where we actually have a key reference for that, right? Just if you release the first 6 months of data for DR1, you still don't have half the sky in year 2. I think that's really it. And I think just the other thing was we talk so much about brokers and streams, and most users don't care about that. They just want to be able to point to an object and give me all the data about that object. Does anyone who's in that group want to add key things that I missed? Melissa, Ken?
I think the only thing I mentioned was what do we mean by real time?
Oh, that's true. We don't mean real time in like what real time people mean. We just mean some number of seconds. Oh, sorry.
Seconds or minutes?
Right. Thank you, Anais. I think that was the question. Do you care about minutes or seconds? And I think Solar System cared about less than a minute, and almost no one else did.
Michael, I know you said that people don't necessarily care about streams and want to look at their one object on a web page or something of that nature. And that certainly may be true of how people are doing things right now, but I'm not sure that'll carry over to LSST necessarily. Like, we should imagine things being a little bit broader than how they're working right now.
Sir, I agree with that point. I don't mean to say that people, I said point to one light curve, but maybe that's point to 10,000 light curves. I agree with that shift to modality, but I don't think streams are the answer to that.
Sure, got it. 4 orders of magnitude, what's that between friends?
Yeah, yes, I mean, this point in Godam is how do you let people access the data in a way that is perhaps doing in a transition, in a smooth transition, because today no one or very few people are actually listening to the streams that you generate. But so I think this is an important point. I don't know what will happen in LSST. So are there any more comments or questions? If not, I think we can continue with the breakout rooms from today. And the first one was interbroker collaboration. And I think Emily was the moderator.
Yes, I can talk. I can talk a little bit about what was discussed. So the idea was to discuss how could we encourage the diversity and how the brokers could communicate and collaborate between themselves in many levels. So there was a discussion of agreeing on some format or some output of our outputs in a way that facilitates the user interaction of the brokers, but also to avoid things like the same people, the same object being given different names by different brokers and things like that. We also that's something that we should work on. We also discuss the possibility to the fact that we are all working technically on very cutting edge issues, and we have a small group of developers working on different brokers. So it would be important to collaborate between the people who are actually in the development side. This would not be something that would be seen by the user, but it would be important to, especially if we're thinking about something that needs to be constantly updated over 10 years or something. It would be important to have some collaboration in that sense. And then we also talked about how to avoid the winner takes all scenario and how to encourage in many different levels the diversity within the broker system and avoid that, like as it was discussed here already, only one broker ends up being the default thing. We discussed about the possibility of writing some community document on that direction. We did not come to a conclusion if that would be how that would be done, but I think we agree on all of the levels that we should all reinforce and encourage the diversity between the broker systems. I also comment on some very simple when you think about machine learning and ensemble learnings, if we could combine the probabilities of the brokers. We also did not come to a conclusion if this would be a good thing to do, like use the probabilities of each broker, which will already be public, as an ensemble member to do a big classification, which would take into account the different algorithms. But anyway, it would be just a way to make it clear for whoever is looking to the broker community that this interaction and this diversity exists. And also englobing all of these things, we also talked about the construction of a broker community in itself, like all of the people working in the development of the broker infrastructure, that organize ourselves in advance in a way that it could make our lives easier, as well as the life of the people who are actually using the outputs of whatever we're doing. Feel free to add if I forgot something, but I think it was more or less that we discussed.
Thank you, Emily. Any comments or questions?
Just from part of developers as myself, maybe we can encourage to start using more the channel community alert brokers, for example, in Slack, in the LSST. I don't know, we can maybe start talking more between us to solve different problems. Maybe I'm going to start doing that since today. Maybe I can post a subject that can be of concern to you. That's it.
Someone else? Anyone else? So if not, we have I think 10 minutes, so we can move to the following two breakout rooms. The next one is about training sets.
Yeah, so I took the moderator lead there, and let me find, I lost it, there we go. Right, so I had posed the question, and so I took the moderator lead, but basically we had been finding that it was a little bit tricky well, the training sets that we were using were not necessarily well vetted, or had some problems with them, and it took time to be able to sort of curate them properly or better. And then other things, we didn't have expertise in it, and sort of relied on not super clear training sets that might have problems with them. And so we were sort of wondering, it was kind of the opposite of the question that Anis was saying, like, oh, okay, we want to have diverse training sets. In this sense, we want to have, there's not a lot of people working on stuff in some of the brokers, and we want to have some training set that kind of is reliable, even though we don't have the expertise in there. And so that would be using the training set amongst multiple brokers in this case. And maybe that's not seen as good, maybe it is, I don't know. But that was kind of the start of the discussion. And so basically, is there a good way to share this? How do we do this? Also, in terms of training sets, is there, in some ways, trust could be equated to classification probability? And would it be useful to have a probabilistic approach to all the training sets, to say, okay, it's not 100% this, it's 90% this, and so that actually allows you to fold in some uncertainty as you bring it through. There are different approaches in terms of pruning, pruning human-made and machine-made classifications. There's certainly some need for that, but how it's done is not super clear yet. There's some active learning approaches that are kind of being probed at the moment. ZTF was a good example. Matthew sort of talked a little bit about ZTF's use of internal classifications from human trained and from machine learned. And they're actually going to make this public soon in a sort of subset of their data. And the idea is to have a relatively rich taxonomy that is sort of developed. And that, of course, led to the taxonomy question, which we had talked about earlier. And actually agreeing on a somewhat common taxonomy is very important. And we may not be able to get over that hump. The other side of that coin is that some classes just simply cannot be separated very well with the data in hand. And how do you deal with that? Let's see. The other sort of issues were, in some cases, the variability or the things that you're classifying are not, the physics behind it is not necessarily well tied down. And so when you model that, or say generate a simulated light curve, say AGN variability, you're going off of sort of best practices, but those things may not actually encapsulate everything that is inherent in the data. And again, it's a little bit too big to deal with, but it was sort of one of the things that was brought up. Gautam sort of discussed a little bit the plastic version 2 and the additions that they're making that are sort of useful, and how that will help us in sort of understanding some of the problems. Again, it's a small team, hard to encapsulate all the physics. It would be useful if there was a way of having some additional help that could input things where they're weak, and it's open, but how to sort of communicate that, have communication channels. Finally, we ended on this idea of having sort of a scientific community buy-in to having a hub where you would put your classifiers, your models, and your training sets. So Matthew suggested TensorFlow Hub, which is already sort of being adopted, but needs a larger community buy-in, and requiring that everything is documented, having the metadata there. It could be very, very useful to have it in that format. And then actually you could use, because it's all kind of in a similar format, you could pool it. And so you could pool different training sets, you could play them off each other, you could compare them. And in this way, you might be able to come away with a more reliable training set. And then finally, we might think about this as a way of kind of peer reviewing the catalogs or peer reviewing the labels, which is very critically needed. And it's needed not just by like one referee, but by many to kind of develop something that's sort of gold or silver standard. So no conclusions, but I think that's a good summary. If anyone wants to jump in with things I missed, go ahead.
Thank you, Franz. Anyone, Raul?
So I was just wondering, there are already some collections like Supernova Catalog, WiseRep, TNS. Is it correct that what you're proposing to put into TensorFlow Hub is a subset of events there that will be vetted by individuals?
I guess to some extent, yes, but TNS is only Supernova. So where that's good, but we also need something else, and we need it kind of in one place, or ideally it would be nice to have a repository that's in one place. Right now, TNS is known by the Supernova community. It's not known by the variable star community. It's not known necessarily by the asteroid community. And so having some place where things are all in the same format and kind of accessible would be very useful, I think. If that doesn't really answer your question.
Let me just clarify. TensorFlow Hub is not for essentially storing training data. It's for storing models. But part of the thing when you register your model is that you should provide the training data marked up, so it's well described in terms of metadata. So what we would encourage is people who are working on classifiers more so to put their classifier plus the training data in there, then we can mine the training data, rather than something like Open Supernova or TNS, which is just labeled data, but it hasn't been curated from the perspective of being a training data set.
Thanks.
But I mean, there'll be people who'll get data but not actually run a classifier. would putting things on TensorFlow Hub miss that out?
If it wasn't folded into a classifier, probably.
Yeah, it's not supposed to be a repository just for training data sets.
But I also pointed out that you don't have to use TensorFlow Hub. Plastic is on Zenodo, and that's fine.
Yeah,
that's for other cadences. It's TensorFlow Hub was an example. It wasn't like we should absolutely use that one sentence.
The reason why TensorFlow Hub is good is because they have a standardized metadata description that you've got to provide. So if your data set in there, it's going to be described in terms of discoverability, which is maybe not the case for, something we come up with.
Yeah, there are other locations which can host the data sets. So for instance, UC Riverside has a time series related data sets, not just from astronomy, but from all over. There are some other library systems. I believe the Harvard system has possibilities of hosting data sets.
and I think to summarize, this is exactly why we need a common repository, because you just mentioned 4 different things which probably are, not known to many people. And, it's kind of hard to know about all of these things. And the discoverability of it is very difficult, I think, and tricky.
Right. So I think discoverability is the key.
I think we need
not
to move to
where the file lives.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you, Michael, but I think we have 2 minutes for the next breakout room, which was which features should be computed by brokers. Who was the moderator?
Hello, probably I can describe if Anais allows me. So we started with catalog cross-matching again, and it was proposed to have some union meta-catalog or some common cross-matching strategy for all brokers, so we can compare results, and we can implement some cross-matching techniques once and to use it everywhere. Then we discussed briefly some features which are well known, such as period, because period was mentioned during the whole workshop, for example, for variable stars and for asteroids. Then some measure of average magnitude and color, and some average of some measure of amplitude of both magnitude and brightness and color. Then we discussed template fitting, which probably can be used for some small sample of objects, for example, for good supernova candidates or for faint variables. But it was mentioned that it could be too long to make a single template fit. So maybe it's not, I think, that a broker should provide, but I think which should be implemented in a filter or some module of broker. Then the relative parametric fitting. Simple parametric models can be useful, for example, for early transients, such as, again, supernova. Yes, for example, parabolic or linear fit of early stages of light curve can be useful for broker users. Then we discussed a lot of ideas which we don't know if they are implemented in some single feature, and which features we need to achieve these tasks, but we would like to have something that some measure, some features which could help us to solve such tasks. So first was color variation-based features, which can be useful for AGNs. So for example, if a color of AGN changed, it could be a marker of some transition, of some, for example, changing look AGN. The same is true for some types of wearable stars, but we should remember about the reading, and we should discuss which color pairs are important and which color pairs should be used. Next thing, again, it is close to color variation or brightness variation. So we would like to have some technique that will allow us to track fast color or brightness variation, for example, in filters or just in searching through our database of features. So probably, I don't know what is solution. Maybe it could be some second, some deviation of features, some how to say, second stage features. Yes, we can compute some feature rolling features, some difference of features when we have new alerts for all the light curves. Next, sorry.
I'm sorry. Can you finish in 1 minute?
Yes. Thank you. Next, we need some features as a marker of object reappearance. Yes, for example, we have some, I don't know, recurrent transient. Yes, and we would like to have feature which will mark these objects. Yes, and the last thing we have discussed is what will light stream, not the full stream, yes, for brokers, but light stream look like. And it was mentioned that light stream will keep the information except cutouts, or will change the way it will provide information. So it was some discussion about light streams. So that's all.
Thank you very much. So I think we don't have time for questions, so we can move to the next session, which we're a few minutes late. So preparing for the next workshop, and I believe Anais will lead this discussion. Nice.
I think there is a breakout room we haven't discussed, Francisco, interaction with broker teams. So if somebody can do that so very quickly, I will moderate the last 10 minutes.
Okay.
I can do that quickly.
Thank you.
Yeah, so this room was myself and Alex Kim and Melissa Graham. So let's see, a couple of things that were brought up. Alex brought up that it would be very useful to have some sort of standardized output or format from different brokers, particularly for those who are listening to multiple brokers and wanting to combine some of that information and pull from different brokers to be able to have some uniform format there, so they didn't have to do too many different things. Alex also identified that he felt that metrics and information related to broker health would be really useful. So for example, how long are different processes taking, why maybe a particular classification failed for a particular alert, and understanding or knowing why that failed would be very useful. And then I was very interested to hear how different groups wanted to interact or connect to brokers. For example, do most people want to just query the database and they don't care too much about the alert streams? Are there groups who want to be able to connect into the middle of a broker processing pipeline and spin off their own parallel analysis, things like that? Over the last 2 days, I've heard interest in both things as well as others. I've been in particular, I've heard a lot of interest from people who are who want access to the database primarily, as opposed to the data streams, and Alex echoed that sentiment also.